All right, we are live from my office. It's Elevate Your Grind. Yep, that one doesn't work. We'll try a different one next time. But welcome to another episode of Elevate Your Grind. Oh, my guest revealed herself for the first time ever. Usually we try to keep it a secret until later on, but I have an amazing guest today. My guest today, and it seems we're doing a very good job of getting all the top women in cannabis on this podcast. We've interviewed Cody Sanchez, Bestavola, Rosie Matteo, and we've got another one that is just on that level, if not higher today. Just to give you guys a heads up, we've got some great episodes coming up this month. We've got next week Ryan G. Smith from LeafLink on the 14th. We've got Socrates Rosenfeld from Jane Technologies on the 15th. Alex Milligan from Nug on the 21st. Carson Humiston from Banks on the 22nd, Eric Schnell from Mood 33. And then on the 28th, we have Cynthia Salarizada from Solar Media. Really excited about that. Also, Saka Wines is her company in the cannabis industry. Really excited for this month. And I'm also working on one more special episode for you guys. Somebody that I am a huge fan of, more on the celebrity side of things. But hopefully that comes about and you guys can see our special episode coming up. So like I said, we have a titan of the industry today. My guest today has ran one of the longest operating funds in the cannabis industry. On top of that, they were awarded the #1 performing hedge fund in 2016 and 2018. Not #1 performing cannabis hedge fund, #1 performing hedge fund. Like out of all the smart investors out there, they were #1. I would probably celebrate that more than anything else. Please welcome my amazing guest, Emily Paxhia.
Thank you so much for having me. And what an introduction, a titan. All right, I'll take it.
Well, come on. I mean, look at what you've done. You've been operating in the space since 2013. You've had the #1 performing hedge fund in 2 different years. I mean, all this and you think about it, it's really only been 7 years that you've been doing this, right? And you guys are crushing it. You started Poseidon in 2013 with your brother Morgan, and I've got to ask, I've been around a lot of brothers and sisters and they're close, but they also kind of like get under each other's skin. What's it like working side by side with your brother?
We grew up in a family business. Our mother and father worked together in the real estate business. Our mother did the accounting for the business, and she also had a real estate license. So she was helping to source and to acquire properties for the business. So I think we saw what it's like to work within a family and yet remain a family that is like loving and respectful of each other. And so I think it was a strong foundation for us. Additionally, we grew up sailing and racing boats together with our father, who was type A plus by all accounts, very intense man. And so I think that if you can sail and race and deal with kind of crazy weather conditions and still enjoy each other's company, then you can run a company together. But I think one of the things that, that I learned really early on is that it comes down to just being incredibly respectful of each other and finding your lanes where you both excel. And then, by the way, giving each other attaboys or attagirls when you do something really well. And I think that that's one of the keys to our success, is that cannabis is so difficult that when somebody does something good, you have to acknowledge it, that they've done that. And so I feel like very early on, we figured out that it's important to kind of give each other accolades because nobody else is going to. The space is way too hard. So you're just going to feel like you're running into the wall time and time again. So you have to look to your teammate to be your biggest cheerleader. But then we do debrief and run through what worked or didn't work. So it's not just all accolades. It's just, we try to be very supportive of one another. And I think that's been one of the keys to our success of working together.
That's really cool. And I love the fact that, I read in an interview, you said you were always going to go into business with him. And when you discovered cannabis, you made the phone call to him and said, dude, this is our thing. This is the thing of our generation. That might actually have been a direct quote. I got to imagine though, are there any little brother and sister jabs that you guys throw in there? Maybe, you guys are looking over a company and you look at something. It's like, I don't know, that might be a bad decision. Oh, a bad decision. Like that girl you dated in high school senior year. Like, is there any of that going on, or do you guys tend to keep it professional in the office?
Oh, we keep it we laugh. I'll say this, it's a fun environment to work in. I think we have a good time. And yes, we do rag on each other pretty regularly. But we try to, we keep it profesh in front of the team, but we also just try to acknowledge the fact that we are sister or brother and kind of keep it fun in that respect, because we want our employees and teammates to feel like they're just as a important part of the team as we are. I don't want to create that artificial barrier because we're sister brothers. So I feel like we've tried to create fluidity across that in the organization as well. And, Poseidon is truly, something that we've built and we love so much. So we try to make it a fully integrated family of working environment. So
that's really cool. And you guys, I'm fascinated on the brother sister thing, but you guys have done so well, over the past 7 years. And that's amazing to me, because there are a lot of people who have made some bets in this industry that are notable investors here. And unfortunately, we're getting to a point in time where it doesn't seem like those are working out. A lot of the original companies in here that people were backing that became our giants are unfortunately running out of steam and falling apart, right? And you had mentioned a few times that you really like seeing people that are building something and not just going after it for the money, which I think is the smart move. So when you started looking at this space, you tend to, and again, I'm going off of everything I read, so if I say anything wrong, I'm going to blame everybody else who wrote articles about you. But you started looking at more tech investments and avoided the plant touching stuff. Now, I know a lot of the investment funds in this space kind of took the same approach. Plant touching was a very risky investment early on. In hindsight, was that a good move for the investors in this space, or have plant touching companies over that same period of time, now that you can see the results, would those have been more lucrative? Because at the end of the day, the tech companies, the service providers, and everybody else, they don't grow unless the industry grows. So, now that you can Monday morning quarterback it, what are your thoughts?
Well, and that's one of the things I always like to clarify, is that when we launched the fund in 2013, we said, yes, we're going to focus on the ancillary components of it, because at the time there were a couple of reasons for that. One, we did not know how investors would feel about investing into companies that are technically coming afoul of federal law, which was the plant touching companies. The second was that you could not place equity investments into some of these states, for example, Colorado, which was the adult use market of the time, because the state had restrictions around that. And we didn't know what the limitations would be. So our first focus was, you're correct, on ancillary companies. We looked at ag tech, we looked at software, and it was also our thesis that those companies would need capital to grow, and that the plant touching companies would need those platforms in order to grow themselves, because they had been dealing with off the shelf systems that weren't working, weren't helping them to stay compliant, or paper and pencil, which is insane, considering how much revenue they were doing. But very early on, we identified that some of these operating companies that had been around for a while just needed expansion capital. And so the first ways we participated were actually in 2014 and 2015 with plant touching companies by providing them short-term notes. Just like they'd go to the bank for a short-term loan for expansion capital, we were able to underwrite debt pieces. And that was actually how we first jumped in on the plant touching space. So we've been invested across the entire spectrum across the industry this whole time. And so like one of our earlier investments on the plant touching side was GTI, which is now a multi-state operator. Everyone's familiar with it. And we also jumped into Canada, where it was federally legal. So one of our very first investments on plant touching was actually in Afria, which now is a pretty big LP that people are pretty aware of. And we were in that when it was private before it went public. So that's how we participated on the plant touching side. And I think you're absolutely right, though, that to have limited to not do that, we would have missed out on tremendous growth, because some of those companies have been great contributors to our performance. But we still believe in the ancillary piece heavily. So that's why
I agree. I think the ancillary piece is definitely needed, and maybe it's a chicken and the egg thing, right? Because the cultivators and the plant touching companies and the dispensaries are relying on these service providers to really kind of take the innovation head on and help streamline a lot of their processes, which in turn will help them become more profitable. But then again, the ancillary services are also dependent on the plant touching companies to be successful. So this way they have money to get paid and they can continue to invest in their product as well. So, I think you've done a very good job kind of complementing yourself and diversifying the portfolio of Poseidon. And on that note, when you guys were building out that first portfolio of companies, did you have that in mind thinking, okay, as we build this portfolio, we don't want, although we're investing in the cannabis space, and I would love to get your opinion on whether the cannabis industry is an industry just because it centers around cannabis, or at the end of the day, the cannabis is really just a commodity that's going to filter into other industries as we move forward here. But as you're looking at this, did you take that view where cannabis was kind of a commodity, and then you look at and say, okay, when we build this portfolio, maybe it's 5 to 10% plant touching. We're going to have 20% tech. We'll have, 10% this, etc., maybe 5% real estate, whatever it is. Did you guys kind of look to structure that portfolio, or were you just looking for good, solid companies and happen to diversify along the way?
Yeah, so we actually, before we launched the fund, we kind of put the plant in the middle of it and then thought about all of the ways you could participate in investing in that all the way around it. And so we did divide it up into subsectors that we thought were addressable opportunities. And we did allocate roughly percentages to it. I will say that that expanded and contracted as we realized what the opportunities were. And we always waited till we could find the teams that we thought would best serve that aspect or that sector, a subsector of the market. And we still do that. In our second fund, we have a very clear aspiration about how we're allocating that fund across ancillary and across the entire vertical of cultivation, distribution, manufacturing, and retail. And so we are very thoughtful about, and then of course, we do have a 10% carve out on that for industrial hemp. And when I say industrial hemp, we're very specific that we're talking about hemp for uses such as biofuels, carbon nanotechnologies, textiles, things like that. We think about that supply chain very specifically. But yeah, so we just tried to think about it not just in terms of what's interesting, but what the timeline to when those markets would be investable. Like industrial hemp has definitely had a longer R&D curve, and I think now we're going to start seeing some real opportunities to deploy further into that space. But yeah, so we did divide it up into subsectors and then just waited until we could find the right teams and the right products or services to fill out in those spaces.
Okay. So I kind of want to back up and talk about what you just mentioned, industrial hemp. This is
Yeah.
something for me that is extremely interesting, right? I look at the cannabis industry as a whole, and considering I'm just sitting here in my office and I'm not actually investing and doing the work, I can come up with a whole bunch of theories and talk about them on this show, and there's no repercussions for it because nobody gives a crap. They're not invested with me, right? But I look at industrial hemp, and it blows my mind that there isn't more of a focus on this, right? Especially given, when you look at our country, you look at what's going on and everything else, that this is a brand new sector. A lot of the people who started to plant hemp were doing it for CBD isolate, right? They're taking advantage of what I talked to Bob Hoban about. This is marijuana light, right? It's marijuana that can be sold across state lines. It can be sold internationally. It can be sold online. It's what the cannabis industry will probably look like if they ever deschedule it and make it federally legal. And a lot of farmers jumped on that train. I shocked that at MJ BizCon, at the Benzingas, and at all these other conferences that we're not seeing a lot more companies that are focused on hempcrete and hemp fibers. And, I learned a lot about this. And, the Model T, the fenders were made out of hemp and not steel and everything else. And I really believe that that's going to be the majority of the future of our industry. So kind of two questions. I want to understand more about industrial hemp, where we are as an industry with it, but also 10 years from now, 15 years from now, when we look at the cannabis industry, right, is the adult use recreational or even the smoking and the flower part of it really going to be the smallest part of the industry? And are we going to see a bigger wellness component come out, a bigger medical component come out? And then is industrial hemp going to be the biggest part of that? And I know that is asking a lot from you to predict.
No. I love these questions. Okay, so for me, cannabis lives on a spectrum in terms of the markets. So I think there's definitely going to be a lifestyle component to this market that is very much, I would associate it to craft beer, smaller wine and spirits brands, and also what's it called, coffee. It's very
Okay.
highly specified coffee. And so I feel like that's like a whole thing and people love it because it's rich and there's experiences around it. You feel a certain way and you connect over it. So, and you travel to do it or see it, like when I went to Hawaii, I went to a coffee plantation. When I was in India, I went to a coffee plantation. It was very fascinating to learn about these things. And well, I'm addicted to coffee, so that's a different, but
I'm in that same boat. This is right off screen right here. Don't get me wrong.
but so I feel like, but people love it, right? Because it's not just the thing, it's all of the experiences around the thing. And then you get to tell everybody about it. So I think that cannabis will absolutely fit into that. And I think that that's what California, when it starts to function as a market, that will be a beautiful aspect of it. I still firmly believe in that. And I think companies like Spark and Flocana are just going to love the moment that that actually can happen. And when we have vaccines and we can all travel again, that's a whole other thing. I do think that wellness is an enormous category. And I think it's just the market potential there is huge. And I think, unfortunately, CBD almost ran too fast. And I think that then there was a lot of misinformation and a lot of confusion. And I think there are people walking away from the category potentially because they maybe didn't have the most informed or productive experience with it. But I do think that we're entering into this whole phase of health and wellness with like adaptogenic mushrooms, using, probiotic, naturally occurring probiotic and prebiotic products, and then cannabis as a plant that you break down into various compounds, I think will be all a part of that. Almost more like an active ingredient is how I think about it. And I think that's an enormous market potential. And then we have the pure medical pharma, which I think has a long tail and will be an enormous market, but in its own right, but I think it'll look very different. And again, it will be a compound in a patented product that will be sold through the very specific pharma channels that we know of today, which is what GW Pharmaceutical is doing, right?
Yeah.
So I think there's a wide spectrum, and I think what's really cool is if you can think about how you can take a bite of those different aspects of the market. Industrial hemp, I think, is like a completely different animal. I consider it to be like the workhorse of the species of plants that we're dealing with. It does make me sad again that I feel like CBD got really hot. I think some farmers got sold this concept that if you grow CBD, you're going to have this great yield of your crop. And then, but the problem was no one was tracking how much CBD hemp was being planted. And so then, to your point about commoditization, it was just commoditization across the board and prices plummeted. And so then I know a lot of farmers feel really burned about that, but I wish if we could have taken a minute to talk about growing crops with multiple end uses. And if we had a supply chain that could absorb that, like one of our companies that we're invested in is manufacturing to have the end result be for textiles. And so they're doing a lot of work with companies that are very interested in having a more sustainable input than cotton or frankly, even bamboo. And that there's this really amazing shift because of COVID. Let's bring the supply chain more localized. So what if you could have seed to sown hemp in your products and you've got it grown in the USA, you're turning on these textile mills that have maybe not been turned on for decades, and you're putting it out into a mass market. And so to me, that's just the beginning. And then if you start talking, there's a really brilliant study about using this thing in carbon nanotechnologies instead of graphene or graphite for graphene, and which is you have to mine for that. But they're finding that in our cell phone batteries, you can use these bast fibers, and it's really interesting. There's a whole PhD did a whole study about it out of New York State, and it's fascinating to see.
Yeah,
so,
given the state, what was that? I missed your last statement there.
No, I mean that's just a huge market that isn't even being contemplated when we think about the market size potential of this plant.
So on that note, and I think I got this right. I think I saw it on Twitter. I saw someone put it out, but this past year, the legal market did about 15 billion in sales. Is that correct?
Yes, isn't that the goal for 2020? Is that right?
Maybe it's the goal for this year. I don't remember if it was what was predicted for this year, for his last year. Again, I'm not an investor, so I just read headlines. But you look at it and it's crazy to me that this industry is doing $15 billion. It focuses on the flower, the smokable flower, and some of the medical aspects of it, some extracts and everything else. We haven't even conquered the black market yet. So the legal cannabis market is not even like the traditional market, the stone, not even the stoners, the smokers and everything else. We haven't even captured all of them yet, right? There's still a ton of people out there that are buying from the black market. We look at adding the CBD side, we look at adding the industrial hemp side and all the other things that you just discussed. I couldn't even take a guess at how big the cannabis market is going to be in 5 to 10 years from now when all the stuff that you just mentioned come to fruition.
Yeah, the potential is enormous, because if you do think about it more almost as an active ingredient, then it changes everything. And to your point, so that the market has been growing roughly 30 to 33% year over year since we got into it. I think it was 36% the first year. This year, it's slated to grow 40% year over year. And then we've got an election in November that could unlock additional markets. And then we've got like Mexico, which is an enormous market that could open up. We're unlocking enormous potential with this industry.
It's crazy. I think some people look at this industry and maybe they think they missed the boat because there was a giant pullback and everything else. But I can only imagine that we're at the very, very tip of the iceberg still, with everything still to come. So you guys have two funds. The first one was an $85 million fund that's absolutely crushing it, 53% IRR, net of fees. I saw that, so I don't want to give anybody confusion there. And you have your second fund going on. Is it a little bit harder to deploy capital for the second fund right now, considering you're stuck in the office and not being able to travel around and do your due diligence the same way that you did?
Yeah, that is tough. I think that right now is actually an incredible time to be investing in cannabis. And we actually wrote a paper about this. There's this thing called the Gartner hype cycle, which is what reviews the pattern of emerging markets. And you can see how it tracked with technology as a sector and other emerging markets. But we have an interesting additional wave to the Gartner hype cycle, because this industry truly hasn't seen industrial or institutional capital come in because of the federal status of it. So we're in a very different space. And I think it's a great time to be deploying capital into the space, because as you opened in the earlier part of this podcast, I think that there was a lot of hype, right? And things got really expensive and everybody was rushing into the space, putting capital in with just a handful of names, which have now proven out to be pretty problematic in the way that they were operating. Now I feel like we're now in a more mature phase with this industry. People are more focused on EBITDA. They're more focused on operational efficiency. They're attracting great talent to the industry. We've been proven to be essential through this time with COVID. I feel like right now we've just hit an amazing reset. And I think that the companies that you can find now that are investable are the companies that we'll see into the next like 2.0 of cannabis. Or I think about it as like 3.0, because we owe a debt of gratitude to all the people that were operating in the medical markets before we all piled in and decided it was a good idea. So yeah.
Yeah, no, and let's actually shout out one of your investments here. We've got Rise. GTI operates as Rise down here in the state of Florida. They're actually one of my favorite chains in our state. So I'm glad you guys are back them, and I think they're doing an amazing job. I looked at the early days. You talk about the early days of Poseidon a lot, and being laughed out of an angel investor room and really not being able, it was harder to raise capital, especially back in 2013 when you didn't have that many legal states. A lot of family offices are the ones that are investing in this space, right? And I spent a few years in the family office world. I've been involved in that world. And I can tell you from my own standpoint, a lot of the conservative, bigger name family offices didn't want to touch this. Now, there are plenty of them. And this is kind of my opinion, right? I think the ones that are starting to hit Gen 2, Gen 3 were a lot more open to this, but a lot of the wealth creators that are, 60 and above and trying not to age discriminate will look at it and they didn't see it. I've seen family offices that have had family, drug problems in the family, and they still look at cannabis as a gateway drug and refuse to invest in it. Do you, and I kind of still see that today. They're a little bit more open to it. Do you still struggle when you look at traditional family office groups and family offices to convince them that this is the right industry with all the stats you have, and then obviously the amazing returns you had on Fund One?
Yeah, no, actually, it's funny. You're absolutely right. We did have to, there was a lot of education and information that had to go on in the earlier days of this. And also just trying to convey what we were trying to build by investing into this industry, not that we were trying to fund anything. For some reason, people thought we might try to fund illicit operations, which I was boggles the mind since we're, obviously like a
Yeah.
registered fund, we're audited, we do all, anyway. But I get it. There was an enormous amount of stigma loaded onto this space. I mean, Nancy Reagan did her very best to make sure we were all very, very scared of cannabis. So
Yeah.
the thing we did very early on is we just thought we have to get out there and we have to speak about this. And so we spoke at a lot of family office events just to inform groups, because we figured the more we could be thought leaders, the more we could say, hey, we may not look like what you have as a stereotype in your mind of someone who might want to invest into cannabis. We're going to hold ourselves out there. And yes, sometimes people laughed at us, and that, if anything, it just made us feel stronger about what we were doing. Because like, great, fine, you don't want in on this space, then it gives us more room to play. We get to actually be the people who define how this comes out. So I thought that was an interesting thing of you push a Paxhia and we're going to push back 2 times.
Yeah, I went to an event with your brother Morgan. It was the family office private investment summit down here in Fort Lauderdale. He was on a panel. I hosted another panel, and really enjoyed speaking with him. And I saw him and he did a great job. And I can imagine, a lot of that was part of your strategy. On the other hand, not only were you guys focusing on cannabis and still are focusing on cannabis, but I went on your LinkedIn. I saw when you graduated college and high school. When you guys started this fund, I mean, I have an idea of how old you were. Was it the fact that you guys not only focusing on cannabis, but you were both pretty young? I mean, I'm not trying to out your age here, but I imagine you were about 32, 33 when you opened the fund.
Mm-hmm.
So was it hard being two young kids, brother and sister, investing in cannabis? Was that another handicap you guys had?
Yeah, so it was, we were one of the first. I mean, so you had Privateer, which is really more of like a holding company. It's a bit of a different structure. And then you had us, we were trying to be a fund, like more like a VC hybrid hedge fund structure. So we were young, we were emerging managers, and I'm a female. And none of those things are going in a positive direction. And it was a crazy new sector that it was like in the headlines. And then you had Maureen Dowdy to chocolate bar and went bonkers in her hotel room. Like, it was a tough time. But I think that one of the things that has served us really well is we've had a really strong focus on how we want to build this industry for the long run. And we've stayed very focused on that and have not tried to let the hype sway us or the dissenters sway us. And so we just feel like if we're building businesses that we believe in, that the strong returns will come, and that really has proven out. Like Steve Jobs had that philosophy too, about if you build really good products, people will buy them and the money will come. So that's I'm paraphrasing like crazy there, but so it's important. And yeah, I think being young was actually one of our best assets, because we came at this from a very flexible and nimble point of view. We actually did our own personal risk assessment of, if this goes badly, what happens to us? And we just thought we were both at a point in our career where we could rebuild ourselves to some extent. And I got a lot of LinkedIn messages from my previous partners and clients being like, if you decide it didn't work out, we'll have a job for you. They were very worried. It was scary back then, but I think that's just part and parcel with it. And I think we were very driven. So it was hard. There's no question. It's still hard. It's not a foregone conclusion that cannabis investing is a great thing.
Well, you definitely don't have to defend your choices, because I think your resume and your performance certainly speaks for itself that you guys made the right decision. You're doing very well. You've picked some winners for sure. Your returns are great. I'm extremely impressed, and it's inspiring, right? I look into your story and it just really inspired me, right? Because I'm about that age when you guys started Poseidon, and I'm trying to reinvent myself in this industry, granted in a different way as a media person, but this is such an amazing industry and there's so many great people in it that it's so easy to be a fan. And that's what I do with this show. But I want to kind of get back into your story. And I think it's really incredible because I was very similar to you. You describe yourself as a dare kid when you were younger, and I'm glad that you put a lot of this information on your LinkedIn. You made it very easy for me to find. But, in high school, you played music. You were part of student government. You ran track. You were a dare kid. You thought drugs were bad. And now you're one of the biggest investors in cannabis. How did you go from, I know the story, but for our viewers, tell us about how you went from seeing cannabis as evil by being this, young, very involved girl to now one of the biggest investors in the space.
I think, it's a couple things. I mean, there is the fact that, a hospice nurse brought up cannabis as a palliative care product or concept, I should say, when our dad was really sick, and pharmaceutical drugs don't necessarily all have a good outcome for very, very sick people. Sometimes they make them worse. And with him, it was certainly the case. And so I feel like that was a point of, it was like cognitive dissonance when I was in high school to hear that and to be being taught this whole dare thing and thinking this is the thing. I will say that too, then when I got to college and I started to try cannabis with my friends, I think the cannabis we had available to us was obviously illicit, had no idea what it was. It was probably way too strong for me. And I didn't have great experiences on it. In fact, it often caused me to have a great deal of paranoia. Or just like anxiety, cloying anxiety is what I would call it. So I kind of also wasn't, I wasn't enamored of it then, but what I saw was that my cohort, they were all extremely driven people who've all gone on to amazing careers, and yet they were all consuming cannabis, and kind of a lot of it at that time because we were in college. So it was clear to me that the stigma around it didn't really work. And then the more I started to understand it, and then when I moved to New York, I had access to better cannabis, in New York City. And then I started to enjoy it more in terms of it's an alternative maybe to drinking sometimes, and it doesn't have the same effects as having a hangover. And in fact, as someone who had stomach problems my whole entire life, it was the only thing that ever made it feel better. And so I was like, okay, there's something happening here. And then I moved to California and saw like Apothecarium and saw Spark. And I saw people like you and me standing outside of it, not, the stereotype of Nancy's war on drugs. And I think that was like step 5. And then, went and got a medical card. And then you just see how this thing has evolved and what it really, what it resonates, how it resonates with people and what it stands for. And I think that that's one of the keys to life in general, is just to be open and to understand when you've been misinformed. And that's for me what that whole shift was about.
I love what you just said. I think it's very important to be open and, understand and educate yourself before you make hard and fast decisions on things. I also, it's rare that people who invest in cannabis, or a lot of even the high level professionals, will talk about their own personal use unless they're part of a company, right? I've noticed that within the industry, and it's something that I think is weird. And maybe I'm part of the problem too, that a lot of people don't talk about their actual use of cannabis. And I'm not saying like, oh yeah, we sat in a circle last night and burned one down, but the wellness factors of it, the medical factors of it. You had just mentioned yourself that you've had stomach issues and that cannabis was the only thing that helps you really. And, it's an alternative to alcohol. I think I read, it was an article that you were featured in, it's talking about that women, because they're working more, they're drinking more, and they're getting cirrhosis at a higher level, that this is a great alternative. And because a lot of this, you're a proponent of low dose products. I think that's amazing. I think in California specifically, there was a huge push to see how high they can get the THC percentage up. And I think for the general public, that's a bad thing. For the connoisseurs and the people that are going to be the craft beer enthusiasts eventually, let's look at that for them. But for the general public, low dose, the equivalent to one glass of wine or a beer or a cocktail, is right where we need. And I actually take this quote that you said, like, I felt like I was buying in for the double martini lunch immediately. So with all that babbling, do you think that it's actually your personal experiences with cannabis that give you a lot of insight into the industry and how it should be marketed and everything else? And then, do you think the future of cannabis as we go more general population is going to be those lower dose products out there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that being a female and being not the one who's been the addressed consumer by the traditional market has been kind of helpful, just because I do bring a different perspective to the table. I've been amazed to see that the low dose products haven't taken off to the same extent that I would have hoped, because what it says to me is that we're still not reaching entire pockets of the, well, it cuts both ways, because it still means there's an opportunity there. But I do think that, I know anecdotally from a lot of my female friends that they tend to feel the impact of THC a little bit more, especially if they've not been consuming much cannabis up to this point. And so I think there's a huge opportunity space for those lower dose products, just because people do want to participate, but maybe they want to tiptoe into it and have a really positive experience. I think the market still loves those high dose products. And of course, the companies love them because those buyers tend to be very sticky and they come back, and it's great. So, I mean, we try to use our intuition and try to use our anecdotal information, but we also definitely we use Headset's data platform. I've been on it all morning, looking at different product categories and for the month of June to see what's been happening into this month of July. And we have a kind of thing in terms of going back to your point about being open-minded, is like, we have our own hypotheses, but we run through a hypothesis test. It's like, let's do this. Like right now we're doing a deep dive on the beverage category of the industry, because everyone keeps talking about it.
Yeah.
But we're trying to understand what's actually happening in it. And so, yeah, but I am very hopeful that we'll see more low dose products and more people finding accessibility around them, because I do think there's an entire aspect of the population that would enjoy cannabis. They just don't know it and may find it to be a healthier alternative to some of their existing behaviors.
You're making my transitions extremely easy, and I got to be careful because I know we're getting up on 6, and I'm for the first time ever, someone's interviewing me for the Hoban Minute after this, so I've got to go. But you talked about cannabis beverages, right? So I look at what is the cannabis product going to be when it hits mass market and it starts to get to where alcohol is, right? Because everybody says that cannabis should be looked at like alcohol and everything else, but to me, one of the biggest issues with that is cannabis is invasive. For most people who smoke it, it smells. There's smoke everywhere. It's going to go to the people that are around you. People are going to smell it. And when you look at consuming cannabis in public, that's going to be a big negative against it, right? They have the OG Cannabis Cafe in LA. I'm a cannabis user. My wife is not. We were going to go out to LA for my birthday, which is coming up. And unfortunately, we can't go because of COVID. We were going to go to the OG Cannabis Cafe. We're going to go to the Comedy Store. And I couldn't imagine it. I was actually on the fence about going to the OG Cannabis Cafe because she wasn't going to enjoy herself there. She was going to be miserable. She doesn't like the smell. She doesn't like the smoke. So when we look at the future, if cannabis starts getting accepted as alcohol, people don't like to smoke in general. They don't like to be around smokers. I candidly think that the reason why there's so much no smoking sections on planes and in restaurants and everything else, why smoking is not allowed, is not because people were really that concerned about the secondhand health effects. They figured that out after they educated themselves, but because it was so freaking invasive. Do you think that this is going to be an issue for the general acceptance of cannabis in our country? And do you believe that the most popular cannabis products 10 years from now may not be smokable flower or anything that is a smoking form of cannabis?
So it's excellent question. One of the things from the beginning of COVID that we saw when the quarantine started was in the Headset data was like, boom, the explosion of gummies and edibles. And I think it's exactly to the point of what you're saying right here, which is that it can be invasive, and especially if you have children in the home and you don't necessarily want to model adult behavior, I feel like that cuts both ways because we all have bars sitting out in our homes. I don't have kids, so I don't really
Yes.
but I feel like there's ways that this could be done where you could model safe and responsible usage of everything in front of your kids, but I don't have kids, so I shouldn't speak about these things. But I think that that's where that came up, is that maybe your spouse or the person you live with doesn't want to experience your cannabis consumption with you. Maybe it's just more discreet, or maybe you like the longer lasting effects of it. So I think that that's why these different form factors are really taking shape. And then the thing is that I've noticed is that these pre-rolls, these mini pre-rolls, especially, like, they call them dog walkers, which I think is a
Yeah.
brilliant. My friend Hugh says it's like, great, you like take the dog walker out, you walk the dog around the block, you take a couple hits of the joint, you send a couple of sexy WhatsApp messages, and then you're home. And it's like this great little, like, few minutes to yourself. Or like my brother always says, like, you take a dog walker out, you take the dog out, you listen to one song on Spotify,
Yeah.
and then you're done. And it's a great way to enjoy being outside. But I think that different form factors will have different settings where they really resonate. And I think that's why everyone's watching beverage, because we've socialized consuming beverages so much. Let's meet for coffee. Let's grab a drink. Let's this,
Yeah.
that, the other thing. We sit down to share a beverage. And so I think that's why people are waiting for, how is this going to work, where you, maybe I'm a person who doesn't drink, but you do, but we could sit down and have a drink together, and I'm having a cannabis beverage and you're having an alcohol beverage. I'm not sure how this works, and the licensing around that makes it really difficult, because you can't sell alcohol where you sell cannabis. But maybe
Uh,
someday the world will wake up to that.
all really interesting topics, and I say this to every guest, and maybe it's my fault as I dig too deep into your stories, and there's so much I want to talk to you about that I can't get it done in the hour. One thing that really interests me about you is your education. You have a master's in psychology, and I read that you never used it formally, you never became a therapist or anything else, but you use it daily in business, right? Studying human behavior, looking at visual cues and everything else like that. My wife has her master's in psychology. She actually went into addiction counseling for a while, but I've learned a lot from her just about psychology, and have been able to apply it to my own profession. I didn't major in psychology, but I took enough classes in college to be dangerous. I believe that psychology is something that everybody should look into, because understanding of human behavior is important. I think it'll help us all kind of understand each other and understand why certain people behave the way they do or react the way they do to something. But I can see that being a huge advantage in a lot of the things you do. The other thing that you had mentioned, pairing your degree in psychology with this, is that you say a lot of times you're the only woman in the room. And because of that, you're usually sitting there taking everything in, and it's a little while before you speak up. But what you're really doing is you're kind of observing and looking around and taking all the visual cues and everything else. Do you think that your degree in psychology gives you a leg up when you're doing these in-person meetings, and you're able to kind of evaluate, I don't want to say it like give someone a psychological evaluation, but kind of evaluate their behavior and get a deeper understanding of what's going on?
Yeah, I think it's psychology teaches you about active listening, right? If you're thinking about potentially working with someone or understanding something, it teaches you to truly listen and hear what is being said or done, or like, and hear with all the senses, right? So yeah, it absolutely, it's funny because actually um, Abner from Ascend Wellness Holdings, who I have a great working relationship with, he was like, sometimes it's great to be underestimated, because then everybody tells you everything and you can hear what's going on. So it is great if you can be a sponge. And there's a part of me that gets deeply offended when I'm underestimated upon introduction, and that I have to sit there and then and so then sometimes I'll get into my head about, like, how am I going to prove that I'm intelligent and that I can bring something to this table? But the minute, that's all my ego, right? So if I can just throw that aside and say, this is an incredible moment, to your exact point, to understand this person, what makes them tick, and to hear where they're going with this, it opens everything up. And then it actually can be a key to how to unlock whatever it is that's blocking that interaction. So I try to think about it as a way to come alongside people. I'm not trying to like weaponize it against people, but I have had a couple of there have been some really awful people in cannabis, and some of them being men, and kind of understanding, like, just being like, wow, that person has a lot of other things going on, and it's what's driving this behavior. A lot of that'll let you set it free, and then it doesn't dog you down, because that can cloud everything.
Yeah, there are a lot of bad players in this industry, and I've had my fair share of experience with them. And I'm glad you don't weaponize it because I'm pretty confident my wife has weaponized it against me frequently.
Yeah.
She runs everything in this house, so I'm pretty sure she's controlling me with her education, and she's watching this show, so I'm probably going to be in for it later. But I think psychology is a great thing. I love her education. And it's actually a lot of her work in substance abuse that really had me dig into cannabis versus opiates and everything else like that, and listening to a lot of her client stories and everything else like that. Do you think that, on that note, I didn't even plan on going down this way. Do you think that cannabis can be used to help the substance abuse problem that we have in this country? Is that a proper method?
I think it can be. In Canada, they've been using it for PTSD for this whole time, and they've seen a drop in opiate addiction and subsequently also suicides associated with opiates. I think, well, opiates and PTSD. So I think, and they've seen a drop in opiate addiction in states where cannabis has been legalized. So I feel like that's a net win. But to your exact point, one of our earliest investors actually owns and manages multiple addiction clinics. And one of the things he was very clear on is that cannabis itself is not addictive, whereas these other things are physically addictive properties. You can mentally become addicted to almost anything, and that's a whole different conversation. But his opinion was like, this is something that could actually help people. It's not the reason most people are ending up in his clinics. And so he was very quick to understand the value of cannabis. So I thought that was a very interesting insight from him.
Oh, very cool. Well, we're getting towards the end here, and I hate having a hard stop. This is really killing me, especially for this conversation. But I want to get into the fun sort of things because, I read a lot of the interviews that you've done. I've watched some of the videos. There's a one you did with a guy named Mike Z. He was a cannabis business coach. I thought it was great. I really enjoyed the interview. I love the coaching thing, hearing about your trouble managing your inbox and everything else. But I want to get into the personal side of you because I think you're a great representation of our industry, right? And by the way, saying that people, don't give you the due that you deserve when they introduce you or anything else, I can tell you I was intimidated with this conversation. So I hold you in a very high regard. I think other people should the same. Your reputation precedes you. But you're a hard worker. You use cannabis. You invest in cannabis. You're an advocate for the industry. You're young. You're a powerful female, and I think you are a great ambassador for our industry. One thing that I found out by looking at Twitter that I'm not sure that anybody knows unless they follow you on Twitter is apparently you love singing karaoke.
I do. I love karaoke so much, and it's probably the thing that killed. And so Rosie Matteo gave me a karaoke machine for my birthday.
Oh, that's awesome.
Because I couldn't have, I turned 40 in the pandemic, and I was going to have a big party and invite a bunch of my friends from the industry. And anyway, she gave me a karaoke machine, and I have been putting that thing to use.
Rosie Matteo is a gem. She was on the podcast. She's got us a lot of guests, so she is a great person. Are we going to see a Facebook Live with Emily Paxhia doing karaoke? Is this going to happen? Can we make it happen?
So well, maybe not that, but my biggest dream is to do a karaoke fundraiser for the industry where, listen to this, and I really want to make this happen the next time that we can all be together. Like, I want to be able to bid on you and say, he's going to sing Kiss Shook Me All Night Long, and then like have people pile on bids to get you on stage and it all goes to, CCIA or MPP, and just to help fundraise for the policy in the industry. Or Last Prisoner Project right now is a very important one to be leaning in on. But it's my dream to do like an industry karaoke party. We actually 2 years in a row have, during MJ BizCon, grabbed a bunch of people and ran over to this awesome karaoke place off the strip. And seriously, we're there until like 5 in the morning. It was amazing.
So I have to find you next year at MJ BizCon, and I will throw this out there. You ever want to do a karaoke fundraiser, C-Lab is 100% behind you. And I know, not calling you out, Kiss, You Shook Me All Night Long, it's AC/DC. And I mean, I've got a microphone right here. It might just belt out into it right now. I think that would be really fun.
That's actually the most
She
embarrassing.
was a fast machine. She got the moon and scream. She was the best damn woman that I. Nope, we're not going to do that.
I can't believe I made that mistake on camera. Oh well. Thank you for correcting.
No worries. It's fine. Well, unfortunately, we are right at 6 o'clock. I've got to get going, which I'm not a fan of. But Emily, I really appreciate you doing this. It was a hell of a conversation. I really enjoyed it. Thank you for coming. Thank you for doing everything that you do. Thank you for sitting on our investment panel a few weeks ago as well. We can't get enough of you down here at C-Lab. We absolutely have to have you back. Is there any insight or any promotion that we can do before we let you go?
No, I mean, I feel like if you want to, no, I think C-Lab is doing a great job, and I'm glad for all this content while we're all kind of sequestered in our own spots. So thank you for continuing to carry the torch on that. And thank you for having me. This was really fun.
No, absolutely. I try to make it a little bit entertaining. I try to make it a little bit fun as well. I want people to see the type of people that are in this industry, that we are, we're not a bunch of, like I've said it 100 times, we're not a bunch of ponytail, cargo short wearing hippies. We are professionals. It's a real industry. There are real people, and there's good work being done here. So I think you're a great ambassador for the industry. And, if as long as people like you continue to want to be on this show, I promise I'll keep doing it. We're actually coming up. Next week is going to be our 50th episode. We just started this in February. I've been doing 2 a week from the pandemic, and I love doing it. So eventually, if you want to invest in a podcast with no income and only a few followers, I'm your man. So thank you again for coming. And we can send it out. Anything you want to promote before we go? The website, your social media, anything?
Yeah, you can follow us at Poseidon Asset on Twitter, or actually, shoot, my Twitter handle. Oh, EMPAX1, I think, is my Twitter handle. So yeah, follow us on Twitter. We put up as much as we can and try to post thoughtful articles that we find as well. So.
Absolutely. I would recommend following on Twitter. I got to scroll through there before, and that's where I got the karaoke thing going. Well, thank you. And we'll thank Emily one more time. And thank you, everybody else at home. This has been another episode of Elevate Your Grind. As always, I'm Todd Rosales, and we're out. Thank you. That was so much fun.
That was fun. I know you have to jump, but thank you so much. That was great.
No. They text me. I got 5 minutes, but thank you. No, that was really awesome. I really enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed it.
I had fun. It was great.
Good. No, I met Morgan at the Connor Global event, and I didn't want to call them out because she hasn't played nicely with us, but I speak at that every year. I think I lent him rolling papers to go out that night, actually.
I'll have to tell him. Cool.
Absolutely. Well, I'm serious. At some point, I got to get you back on the show. We got into no companies, nothing investing whatsoever, but I really enjoyed it. And let's definitely keep in touch. This was fun.
All right, cool. Thanks for the song at the end too. That was great.
I try to make it a little bit entertaining. I got to differentiate myself a little bit.
That was good. All right, I'll talk to you soon.
Take care. Bye.